Hello, my name is Justin Ding.
And I'm Jameson Henry.
For the past 2 months, we've been working on this event, and it's going to be discussing a topic that's very near and dear to our heart.
Yes, we spent countless hours interviewing, planning, producing to put this together for you.
We really hope that you've enjoyed everything that we're going to bring you here tonight, and for the next hour, we're going to have local leaders in our community talk about policing and the use of force. So we really hope you enjoy.
Yep.
All right, well, welcome everybody to the University of Arkansas Fort Smith. We're honored and happy to be here tonight to discuss and have a conversation with our local law enforcement leaders in the River Valley. Just absolutely tickled to have everybody here. We'll get to introductions in just a minute. Thank you, Jameson and Justin, for inviting us here to have this conversation and talk about an issue that's been kind of on the front pages across our country, and certainly we want to have the opportunity to talk about that. So thank you for inviting us, and we'll get to the panel in just a minute. When Justin and Jameson asked me if I thought that the local leaders would agree to this, would they come out and talk about it? Would they come on camera? Would they do it? I didn't even have to think for a second. I said, yep, they will. I guarantee it. And I knew they would, so thank you all for coming out tonight. I want to say that the conversation we're having is on a true perspective, the use of force in law enforcement. So thank you for the topic and for the opportunity to give our insights and some of our experiences and what we've learned. To our panelists, I want to say thank you all for coming. We appreciate you and your time. I know it's very important, and we'll get to it. As way of introductions, I'm Ray Ottman. I'm the Chief of Police here at the University of Arkansas Fort Smith, and I've been in this role here for about 6 years. And I'll just say that total service is 27 years in law enforcement. And when I kick it to the panel for your first question, if you can give a little bit of your experience as well. But our panel tonight is comprised of local law enforcement leaders in the Fort Smith region. To my left is Chief Danny Baker from the City of Fort Smith Police Department. Next is Chief Deputy Kevin Nickson with the Sebastian County Sheriff's Department. Sheriff Runion with Sebastian County. Bill Hollenbeck, the Chief of Police with the Fort Smith Public Schools Police Department. And Lieutenant Tiffany Johnson with the University of Arkansas Fort Smith Police Department as well. So when they get their questions and they get going, they'll give you a little bit more of their insight and their perspective, and for what they what led them to their decisions and what their opinions are. So we have great experience, and some of that experience we're going to touch on for you that are out there tonight is coming from a wide variety of experiences through a couple of good lenses. Some of those lenses are Dallas, Texas PD SWAT team leader, overseas military service with Sheriff Runion. So I look forward to hearing how some of those experiences have shaped the lens that we see things through. And as leaders, we certainly have seen it through a lot of different lenses, especially lately. So with that in mind, I will be your moderator tonight, and we'll get going. We don't have to mute mics tonight. I don't think so. And we don't certainly have to worry about audience participation as well. Although I did hear that Miss Westfall's class out in Gaines, Oklahoma might be getting a little rowdy tonight, so I hope she can handle everything out there, because we certainly can. So with that, I want to preface this by saying what you're hearing tonight is true insight, and please listen up and send in your questions if you have them, and we'll get started. We're here to discuss, in general, police use of force. And certainly that's a term that over the last 25, 30 years has morphed into some other things, and it means different things to different people, and when we see it and when we hear it. So maybe we should start with giving some context to that term and what it means from a practitioner's perspective, and that perspective of law enforcement and use of force. And I'll start it and I'll kick it off. Use of force it's a wide encompassing term, and it doesn't just mean one single thing, and it doesn't mean one thing has to be present. One of the things Justin and Jameson and I discussed early on was police response is not robotic. We're all human beings, and we have experiences that shape our thought processes and our responses to things. So A and B might be present, but that doesn't mean C is going to be the answer every time. It's not a robotic response, and it's certainly not something without feeling, without forethought, without planning. So Think about that as you think about the context of when police are present and what force might be being used. Because over the years, a term that we are all familiar with is the use of force continuum. And certainly on that continuum is officer presence. Just being present is a use of force under the old term and under some of that old school of thought when force wasn't even used. We didn't have to do anything but be there and people go left or they go right. But it certainly goes upwards all the way up to certainly the use of deadly force. So with that in mind, I'm going to kick it over to Danny to talk a little bit about how that's kind of morphed over the years from use of force to maybe a response. And then talk a little bit, if you would, Danny, your department is accredited
Yes, sir.
for a national accreditation through CALEA. So if you could you give us from your perspective what goes into that policy, review policy, and what you're doing there at the
Okay.
city?
Well, Chief, thank you, and thank you for inviting us to this. I think it's a very good thing. It's also an important topic, and it's not just relevant today. It remains relevant, and so it's very good for us to be able to come together and provide insight on that. And you are correct. The ideas and the norms in law enforcement regarding use of force have changed over the years, and in regards to not only how it's employed, but even how we think about it. And the Fort Smith Police Department actually moved away from the idea of use of force several years ago in our policies and calling it something different. So we have a response to resistance policy. We don't have a use of force policy anymore. And that's important in helping to change mindset about force and how it's used in law enforcement. And I think that, when you start talking about things that are important in laying groundwork and establishing response to resistance or use of force policies, having the proper mindset is very much at the top of that.
Yes.
And so, the Fort Smith Police Department is a nationally accredited agency. We just happen to use the CALEA, which is the Council on Law Enforcement Accreditation. There are many agencies and organizations out there that a law enforcement agency could choose to use. Some of them are maybe cost prohibitive for smaller agencies, and I think that is one of the things that was mentioned in the President's recent commission that he released in regards to law enforcement reform was, at least discussing the idea of requiring all law enforcement agencies in America to have some kind of accreditation. Yeah. And again, there can be substantial cost involved in that, which might be prohibitive for some smaller agencies.
Exactly.
Thankfully, we've been in a position here where we can do that and have been able to do that for a number of years. But what that does for us, it helps us to pattern our policies and procedures off of best practices around the nation. And so, certain standards are given to us that our policies have to fall in line with. In other words, our policies have to meet these standards that this accrediting agency lays down. And so, but it goes far beyond that in that it's not just making the policy. It requires us to continually examine those policies and the review process and our daily operations is something that we have to constantly be wary of and recognize that we have to comply with. Not just, you can have the best policy in the world, but if you don't have compliance with it, it's not worth any more than the paper that it's written on.
Exactly.
And so accreditation helps us to do that. It helps us to hold ourselves accountable to those standards. It also helps us when the standards change or need to be changed or when they need to be re-examined. And so, as we progress, as society changes, as the norms change, and things become relevant that maybe weren't relevant a few years ago, this process helps us to stay on top of that. And then finally, it's crucial in accountability, in the review afterwards. So, and I know y'all don't want to get too much into the weeds of our policy,
Nope, you're good.
but holding officers accountable when they do use force of some kind documenting that, and then a review process afterwards, making sure that supervisors are, paying attention to what's going on the streets with their officers and that sort of thing. And if issues are identified, then handling them in the right way. And so that sounds like a mouthful, but
No, that is, well, this topic is a mouthful, and
Sure.
it definitely changes as, with times as well. So it's actually a great segue. When you talk about a policy, it's enforcing the policy and then having that review. And Tiffany, if I could throw it over to you on this, as far as when that investigation comes in, there's been a use of force. An officer's use force, and it could be in an arrest situation, it can be in a controlling a situation, maybe at a department where there's been an assault or something like that. When that use of force report, can you talk about what our department has as far as a review process and what role you play in that? And then what do you use in that investigation of a review, of a use of force report come through?
In accordance with our policy, any use of force has a document that they have to fill out in addition to the police report that's also submitted with it. And when the report is filed, we review it automatically, myself and Chief Ottman as well. We go over it to investigate what actually happened. Was the force reasonable to what was utilized to control the situation? And the outcome from it, as far as if there were injuries, medical assistance, and things like that. With the investigation, the tools that we have, in addition to the report, is also body camera footage, what all our officers are required to wear when responding to any service calls. And in addition to that, we will interview officer if we need to get further information, and also if there are witnesses there, we will take that into consideration as well. And if we find that the force that was used was excessive, we have options to go as far as trying to correct it, which would include some remedial training, counseling if necessary, or if it's really a bad situation, we can separate employment and also refer them to the standards and report them so they wouldn't be hired by another department as well.
Excellent. Yep, absolutely. And I think Sheriff Runion, as far as what you've heard from the two other departments, I'm sure your department has similar in place that you review as well.
Yes, very similar. The procedures for the review are very similar. As far as the Fort Smith Police Department with their accreditation, I think that they are under probably a stricter set of some rules as far as
Agreed.
how often that they would review.
Yep.
Since I was a chief deputy in 2014, our policy under former Sheriff Hollenbeck and even now, basically every 2 years we're reviewing our policies.
Excellent.
We're updating them and changing them. Just this year, we redid several of the policies to do with use of force. And basically, we wanted to make sure that we're online with what the best practices are, what the precedents, the legal precedents, and of course, following federal and state law. And then we want to look at it and make sure, is that the right way to do it? And then what we would do is we would send that to the risk management and make sure that it fits in. And as far as review, I think we're all very similar. In our case, our initial reviewer would be the patrol sergeant, and then the patrol captain, and if it needs to go further, it would come to Chief Nickson or myself's desk.
Excellent. And I know, Bill, your agency is kind of young. You're still forming, and it's been a couple of years, but you're still in that process. And I know you're very familiar with this as being former sheriff. You're very well at policy. So anything you wanted to add to that as far as what you're looking at? Because you are in a unique situation and setting.
Sure. Whenever you're inside a school environment, use of force or response to resistance is always going to be viewed under a microscope.
Exactly.
As it should be.
Yep.
So, we're proud to say since our existence, we have not had to have any type of use of force review or incident. So one of the things, that we're unique, I would say, is that as police officers inside schools, we look at it as we are there for our primary reason is to protect and serve the student population and the staff and the community. The second, of course, is a counselor to these students and so forth, as well as an educator. So we get a unique opportunity to develop up and close personal relationships with our students and our staff and the community because we're inside these schools. So the other thing being fortunate about being a smaller agency, you get to piggyback off of larger agencies who
sir.
have done the research.
Yep.
Such as Fort
Such
Smith
as-
Police
yes.
Department. You get to look at their policy. We get to look at the sheriff's office policy
Yep.
and make a hybrid that works for, our department. Of course, it has to fall under state guidelines, the
Yep.
use of force, penal code, things of that nature. So our biggest thing, of course, is focused more so on de-escalation, where we aren't forced to be responding to resistance in the first place. But
Absolutely.
even inside the schools, it will happen.
It will, and I want to thank Danny for touching on the cost prohibitive part. I know coming from another agency, we did all our policies, we reviewed everything, and we took CALIA policies from an accredited agency, and we just borrowed them, and we said, hey, we don't have this, but we do have this, so we're going to put these into place. So we weren't going for accreditation, but we knew that those policies were
Validated.
best practice, researched and monitored, and I know Arkansas Chiefs Association has put out policies that cite, precedent, case precedent and state law, and it's highlighted in red, green, and blue, and it tells you which is which. So we've been very fortunate in our review of our policies to use those, and we definitely like when other agencies pay for it and get it done for us, so we thank them for that, because we are using it. Work smarter, not harder, right?
Absolutely.
So in that vein, we'll kick off to the next question and go from there. You guys touched on it a little bit about encountering resistance and our response to that resistance, and it certainly has changed over the years. I know that I've been in it, and I know you all have seen it too. Kevin, can you talk a little bit maybe, or answer, when we encounter those situations where it may lead to, we're going to have to be responding to resistance, what goes into making that decision, and at what point, what factors into those making the decision to use that force, and what force is where we're going to start?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the panel
Absolutely.
again.
Thank you for coming.
30-plus years experience. It's changed several times, and it's probably going to change again before my career
Agreed.
is over. But a lot of how you respond to individuals with use of force per se, it depends on the training you have, and it also depends on the attitude of the person you're coming into contact with. Sometimes the amount of use of force you use can be controlled by the officer. Not saying that it won't be used by that officer, but for example, if you put yourself too close to an individual, then the use of force may change. Just as Chief Hollenbeck mentioned earlier, sometimes de-escalation is the best way to do it. And if you get into somebody's personal space, you may not have that opportunity to do it. So there's different scenarios that can cause a person or an incident where use of force is used from someone being under the influence of alcohol, or someone not being able to accept being even in contact with police officers.
Yep.
And I think that's one of the major reasons. We'll probably talk about it later as to why a lot of the incidents are taking place today, because of predetermined situations
Yes.
before contact is even made.
Yep.
But use of force, again, it's going to be given out at different levels, and it can be controlled by both sides, even
Absolutely.
officer or the violator.
Absolutely, thank you. And I know Sheriff Hollenbeck and I have had a conversation about that very thing earlier. Sometimes that person is the one that's controlling what we do. And Bill, can you just touch on that real briefly about kind of what leads to our decision and kind of who's in control of that a little bit?
Sure. We would like to say with the training and education, years of experience that we have, that we're in control of every situation, but that's not the case. Law enforcement officers are trained to respond to elevations of force by a potential suspect
Exactly.
or citizen.
Yep.
I think as Chief Nickson kind of touched on, some of our response, unfortunately, is based on either good tactics or bad tactics.
Yep.
I think the fundamental change that I feel that we need to do in law enforcement is honestly assess the way that we approach situations. Distance gives you opportunity.
Absolutely.
And so when you are up close and personal, you're limited on the type of response that you can do. So our tactics are very, very important. The way we treat people are very, very important. The way we approach situations are very, very important. You know, we have to admit that 95% of the calls that we're getting, we're not going to calls where people are happiest, right? We're being
Right.
called into critical situations. So I think it's imperative that we recognize that we ensure that we give our officers enough training to understand that distance is a major safety factor, not just for the officer, but just as importantly for even the offender or the citizen who may be involved in this. So it's also outreach and getting out into the public and having communications with the public and getting opportunities of instead of, you can't police at 55 miles an hour.
Yep.
I've said that for years.
Yep.
Getting out in the community and engaging. We're an extension of the community.
Absolutely.
And if law enforcement, I think, sometimes forgets that, I think we're very, very fortunate here in the River Valley. We understand that. That's something that everybody here has committed to ensure that we are part of that community. So it starts with us, but at times the person involved in a situation is, in fact, the person who is dictating the type of response that we're going to have to do to his or her resistance.
Absolutely, and thank you. That is exactly right. I couldn't state that any better, that when they make the kind of decision where we're going, you know, and we give
Right.
certainly that time and distance. I know there was a time early on as a young officer, and like I said, 27 years ago, where we were kind of taught to just go in and just do it, you know, go in and take over and just get out of there, get in, get out, and whatever. And now I see that we've made hopefully some headway on that planning process and how we go in and, hey, do we have some time here? Is there a way we can communicate and we don't have to go hands, as they used to say, at least where I come from. So I appreciate that. Chief Baker, you heard both other ones talk about the training aspect of it. You mentioned that a policy is kind of worthless if we don't use it and go by it and train by it. I know your policy goes above and beyond even the CALEA standards. It does involve some of the PERF recommendations. Could you touch on that just a little bit, on what the officer's mindset?
And thank you for using that term. You'll hear me say it many times, mindset, because I think that's so vitally important to everything that we do in law enforcement, is having the right mindset and going into situations with the right mindset. I also want to thank Chief Hollenbeck for bringing community policing into it, because that's exactly the kind of thing that an agency needs to be engaging in during those times when you're not dealing with a crisis, because everything that you can do to build those relationships is another opportunity to reduce the need for the use of force later on. Yep. You're actually reducing that likelihood that an officer is going to have to use force in some way. So, and that's very important. But you mentioned very early on in this meeting a phrase that was very common in law enforcement and many agencies I probably still do use, is the use of force continuum.
Yep.
And it worked for us for a long time, but when you start talking about things like de-escalation, use of force continuums now take on a completely different meaning, because in the use of force continuum, your mindset is that you're constantly taking one rung above what the whatever force you're being met with, you take the next rung above.
Plus one. Yes, sir.
And that is the way to counter force. However, to develop the right mindset in people, they have to start thinking like, well, maybe I can take the next rung, but do I have to? Or what may be legal may not be the best answer.
Yep.
And so then you start thinking along the lines of, wait a minute, instead of putting myself in a situation where I have to go hands with this person, can I put a little bit of distance between us and maybe a barrier between us, where I can talk to this person and use some other skills to de-escalate the situation? And so that's what we're trying to do with our policies and our mindset. The Supreme Court has long established the objective reasonableness standard when looking at an officer's use of force. And so that is the legal standard. But do we always want to do what's exactly legal?
Right here.
I mean, if there's another option that's less intrusive, then let's take that. So we're trying to incorporate a little bit more of the concept of proportionality in our approach to use of force or response to resistance. And this is a concept that the PERF put out several years ago. I think actually put it to paper in 2016. And, you know, and some officers are apprehensive about it, about some of the things that proportionality suggests. And we're not saying that, you know, that if an officer uses force or of any kind, but the standard that they're going to be held to in a, you know, after action review is objective reasonableness. But if we develop that mindset in the officer of proportionality when they're approaching that situation where force may be necessary, then that's going to help reduce the likelihood of, you know, improper use of force or unnecessary or excessive or unreasonable. You know, and one of the tenets of proportionality is that that the officer be cognizant of what the public is going to consider in regards to how they handle this situation or the force that they use. And one of the things, and officers are wary of that because they think, oh, that means I've got to think, you know, what's the public going to think before I do this? And it's going to slow down their reaction time, and we don't want that. I mean, we still go through the proper training. We want to make sure that, you know, that the officer is safe and
Yes.
does his or her job safely. But what that means is before you get in that situation, you've already made that decision. You've already made that thought process of, you know, how are my actions going to be viewed by the public at large after this is over with. And so your mindset is already being influenced and established, and it's not a, you know, well, I'm going through this checklist in my head, and I've checked all these boxes off, and so I can shoot someone.
Right, yeah.
It's a more holistic view of things. So.
Absolutely, and I thank you for that. I know that PERF, Police Executive Research Forum, it's a thought-provoking group think tank, and Chuck does a great job with it. It is challenging. There are reports that come out challenge us, and I know Tiffany is always getting to read them after I get them. So it's mandatory reading for her on our department as well. And A Word on Mindset. It's one of my favorite books of all time. So if you get the chance to read it, Mindset. I'll do a cheap plug for that, but it's a great book. I love it. As we go into that, kind of in line with planning and event planning and taking that step back, Bill talked about distance being a good thing and time and distance even being better. Kevin, from a county perspective, when you're out there in the county, you could be a long way from your partner, a help, backup, what have you. If you're getting ready to serve maybe something or there's a high-risk planning event going on, what are you taking into consideration when you're getting ready to do those things? And then even on the ones where you can't plan and you're responding to, what goes through your mind when you're maybe 20 miles from your help or getting to them?
Well, that's definitely occurred several times in my career.
I bet.
But what you rely on your training, and most of it is common sense.
Yes, sir.
Common sense. If it's high risk,
Yep.
and if your backup's is at home asleep,
Yep.
I mean, if it's not anything that needs to be done at that time, then you wait on the proper time.
Exactly.
But if it's a call and where you have to respond to action, your training's going to come in and your common sense is going to come in. And what the first thing happens when you come in contact with the offender, if you realize that offender is not quite happy because he has to deal with law enforcement,
That's right.
you have to understand in your head as a police officer that there's going to be some discomfort there, and you have to leave a little room for them to be agitated, so to speak.
That's right. Absolutely.
And because if you react to their agitation, then immediately, then it's not going to get better from there.
Exactly.
So you have to prepare yourself for that, and also you have to prepare yourself mentally for it to go south.
That's right.
And how are you going to react from that point?
Yes,
De-escalation, again, is big in there, and also being able to talk.
Yep.
I've been in some situations where if you were able to talk to someone, I mean, you were able to de-escalate it and not agitate it. And that's the difference, especially when you're by yourself. When you work for the county, you'll find yourself in a lot of dark places by yourself a lot of times.
Yes, sir.
So training and inexperience is the best teacher there.
Exactly, and thank you. I appreciate that. I started in a rural community in northwest Missouri that was very rural, very small, so I feel when you're saying long way from help and it might not be coming for a while, so I totally appreciate that. All right, so we talked a little bit about policies, development, and training of them. I know, Sheriff, you said that you guys review yours annually, at least at least once every 2 years, and then as needed if something comes out. I know, Danny, you guys are looking at yours whenever something comes out as well.
Use of force is annual.
Annual, yep,
It depends on the policy.
got it, yep. And Bill, I know you're developing yours, and when I wrote this, I said, second grade at this school and 11th grade at Southside, and what does use of force look like in different situations? And I feel you writing your policies, because I can't, going on hands-on at that, I just can't even imagine what it looks like. But your challenge is, I feel you on that.
Well, thanks.
I know that from a university setting, we have a very come-and-go population. Our population will rise from 1,000 overnight to 5,000 in the day, and then it can go up and down during the day. So we're coming and going, and we're always cognizant of not just our students, but our faculty, our staff, and then what's coming onto our campus. We're getting people that come onto our campus that know somebody might be here, and we're having to continually, like Kevin said, plan for that. If this happens, then we're going to have to respond like this, and we're very grateful for the relationships we have with both of the departments that are going to be here for our help and our backup, so we're thankful for that. When we talk about gauging threat levels, Bill, I know your experience a little bit, Dallas PD SWAT team leader, I believe, or commander, or
SWAT team member.
member, okay, member. Can you talk about when you get called for that call, and then differing from what's going in for a high likelihood of use of force in that situation, the training and the policy looks a little different maybe for a SWAT team versus a Sunny Mead school resource officer. I'm just using that as an example, but could you talk about the thought process that because you've been at every level of that?
Certainly the training is a lot more extensive.
Yes.
When it comes to use of force, response to resistance, tactics, de-escalation,
Yes.
negotiations, things of that nature. But believe it or not, whether it's a tactical call-out or it's a responding to a domestic disturbance, the law is the same. We operate under, the U.S. Constitution, the state of
Yes, sir.
Arkansas,
Yep.
Laws, use of force policies and procedures and so forth. But when, there's a situation where it's a tactical call-out, a SWAT team is called out, it's an opportunity to slow things down.
Okay.
It's an opportunity to step back, utilize very well-trained professionals from negotiators to tactical officers and so forth. We can slow that situation down, give that person who is inside that house a chance to cool down, start thinking about their actions. If in fact that is not successful, then of course, there's specially trained operators that are out there that can ensure that the situation doesn't escalate into the community.
Correct.
There are times where people have mental health issues.
Yes.
Where, we could try to use all the training, and sometimes it does work, but occasionally it doesn't. But, having a specially trained team of negotiators and SWAT operators to maintain control and ensure that that problem stays within that perimeter and doesn't go out into the community.
Excellent.
It's a great way to potentially de-escalate situations. The whole purpose of a SWAT team is to save lives.
Okay.
It's not to take lives.
Got it.
And so it's tactics and training
Yep.
and dedication from men and women that
Yep.
are sacrifice a lot to get this skill set to protect the community and the public. So it's a great way to slow things down and hopefully have a successful outcome.
Excellent. And that's a great, I'm going to throw it over to Sheriff now, because I know you have service, military service, you served overseas. Kind of the same question to you, that the training that you went through and the rules of engagement, and I know that overseas in that theater, maybe the rules of engagement change, but when you come back and transition, you're still under a policy, under a law. Are there similarities, differences in thought processes that might play into that?
Yes to all of them.
Okay.
There are similarities, thought processes. Yes, I did a year tour in Fallujah, Iraq in '07, and the rules of engagement were very strict.
Yep.
Before we mobilized, it was something you spent a lot of time on. They had JAG attorneys teaching these classes, and they talked about the repercussions of violating the rules of engagement. And essentially, when I was in Iraq in 2007, it was still, it was a war. You know, they were
Yes.
shooting at you. They were trying to blow you up, and so it was a totally different mindset. Later on, I deployed to Afghanistan in 2013, and it was interesting. One of the things that they told us was, when you were in Iraq, we were occupiers,
Yes.
and we look at ourselves as liberators in Afghanistan. That's what they told us. But what was interesting, I had several police officers on my convoy security team, some local police officers. And after going through several months of training and then going and doing the missions and, talking about them and debriefing, one of the things that some of us found very ironic was that in Afghanistan, when I was there, my time there, in some ways it would have been harder to use deadly force as it was explained to us and at what was expected of us than it would have been as a police officer in the United States.
Interesting.
And
Yes.
in talking to that, it was really an eye-opener. I think that most police officers around the country want to do the right thing, and I think they're going to temper, their training, their experience, and trying to do what they believe is right. But we thought that it was very ironic that it was actually, in some ways, easier to use deadly force at the time here than it was overseas in a combat zone. So that really did, it was an eye-opener. And then,
Yes.
of course, we've seen some things, nationally over the last several years that have really changed how we do things.
Yep.
And but yes, it did definitely give some perspective, and it was an eye-opener because there's almost something wrong
Yes.
when that is
Yes, when that's your
what was
thought.
the truth. It's almost embarrassing to talk about it.
Yep. No, I hear you. I get it. And that's an example for everybody watching and paying attention. That's exactly what I was hopeful for tonight, was getting that perspective to see it and that experience that tells us. And that leads us, that you brought that back and it helped you in your department. It's helping us in ours. And so we're very thankful. And thank you for sharing. I know that wasn't easy to say, but we appreciate
Well,
it.
it's embarrassing.
I hear you. I
That's
gotcha. Yes,
really
that's
how I
what
look
the
at it.
word. I hear you. So far, that's been all the softballs, and now to come the hard ones, I guess, if you want to put it that way. We're running low on time. But I wanted to, you touched on, Sheriff, over the last couple of years, and Bill, you mentioned about being under a microscope, and Danny, you certainly understand that, being high visible as you are. You've been visible, you've been vocal on some of the things that have taken place, and we thank you for that. I know that we're all leaders, but we all like to have someone who shares and has a passion for it and goes forward. Community policing, I swear Bill didn't see my notes ahead of time because he mentions right now, and my question that I'm going to raise is about that community policing perspective, idea that it's a practice. Chief Baker, you've been very visible, very vocal. Can you share with us how you embrace that model and why it's important to you, and what benefit maybe you've seen realized by embracing that model?
Well, first of all, let me give a little bit of background about myself, and I'll try to make it brief. But I've been through with just the Fort Smith Police Department. I've been through a variety of different units and assignments within the department, and I came and spent a significant portion of my career working vice narcotics and undercover work and that sort of thing. And so I've seen the way that we've approached things in the past, and something just wasn't working. I couldn't, early in my career, I really couldn't put my thumb exactly on what the problem was, but we're facing a lot of challenges, and it didn't seem to matter how hard we worked or how many people we put in jail, or it was having no impact. And then around about 2016, I believe it was, the President Obama's 21st Century Policing Task Force report came out, and there were a lot of things that were outlined in those pillars, those 6 pillars, that the light suddenly came on that said, this is what we need to be doing. I mean, finally somebody has clearly identified where the disconnect is and where the issues are that are causing us these challenges. And of course, one of those is community policing and rebuilding the legitimacy and trust between the public that we serve, the people who pay us to do this job, and us. And, you know, and I came to realize that it cannot be an us versus them thing. We are part of the community. We are, as I believe Chief Hollenbeck said, we are an extension of the community. We're all in this together. And so everything that we can do to build those relationships, and you know, everybody loves to watch Andy Griffith, but there's a lot of truth in that old show, and the way that they interacted with the citizens of the community and the people. And you can say, well, a place can get too big that you can't do that, and I don't believe that. I believe it just takes commitment. You have to have a commitment to invest in the time and the people and building those relationships. And when you do that, it pays off in so many ways. It pays off in reductions of use of force. It pays off in the reductions in criminal activity. When people willingly comply with the law and are not have to forced to be done to comply in some way, you get a lot more buy-in. And I could give you example after example of seeing that happen, but it's just money well spent, and it really doesn't cost that much, you know, to build those relationships. So yes, I'm very passionate about it. I believe it. I believe there's a time when that particular approach may not be the appropriate approach, but this is another concept that came out of that report, was the whole guardian versus the warrior mindset. And you know what Sheriff Runion so eloquently laid out for us, that mindset of being a warrior. We're not an occupying army. We are here to police the community. And so there may be a time when we have to employ warrior-like tactics, but that should be few and far between. And the more relationship building that we do, the more community policing we do, the less that is necessary. So
Absolutely. And I thank you. I appreciate your passion for it.
you bet.
And Sheriff Runion, I know you've had the opportunity to be out in the community. I get the invites to your coffee sessions as well, so thank you for those. I know it's important to you as well, and Bill, I know for a fact it is for you as well when we work together. Coming out to our Cocoa with the Popo events in the past, I appreciate that. So on that issue. Getting down to the last one, I'm gonna throw it across the panel. We'll start with Tiffany and work this way. What does the future look like from your perspective? Just what does the future look like in law enforcement as you see it? Maybe just one or two things that you see coming down the pike in law enforcement.
That's a heavy question.
Yes, it is. I hear you.
I'm excited about the conversation in regards to, you know, police reform, systematic racism, and things that we can do to try to improve on that end.
Absolutely.
So I am hopeful that this is going to cause some changes in the future, and we'll see how that goes. But
Excellent.
it's unfortunate what's happening, but I'm excited for the future and what that represents.
Absolutely. Thank you. Bill, you've got a...
You know, I'm also excited about the future. I think as a whole, law enforcement has taken a hit to their public image.
Yes.
But I truly believe in my heart that that's temporary. We get it right 99% of the time nationally.
That's right. Yeah,
You know,
yep.
there's hundreds of thousands of contacts that law enforcement officers do that are positive every single day. But there is no doubt that we have to self-examine ourselves and admit that nationally, thankfully not here, locally, there have been incidents where officers have made horrible decisions, you know,
Yep.
and now the rest of the good law enforcement community is paying that price. But
right.
you know what? We accept that.
That's right.
And we have to self-examine. So I think if anything, we have to understand what the community expects of us. We have to look down the future and figure out the way to best have the role of our police officers abide by those new norms that are being set forth by the community. It's here's the bottom line is, you know, everybody wants to be able to walk on the street safely, right? Everybody wants to be able to know that their child can go outside and play in a safe manner, and officers should not harass them or threaten them. They shouldn't feel threatened by them. And at the same time, those officers also want to go to work.
That's right.
And go home also.
That's right.
So
Yes.
the reality is we want the same thing. It's just self-examining ourselves and ensuring that we get to that common ground that I think is so vitally important that our nation begins to heal.
Yep.
And we have to take responsibility even when it's not our agency that
Absolutely.
is directly involved. Our silence at times can be weaponized as well. So
Absolutely.
it's important to have panels like this where we step up and get on the plate and say, you know what, we need to change. We need to
Absolutely.
change our training, our thought process, and conform to what society would like to see us do.
Excellent. Sheriff, the future, what's it look like to you? What do you see?
Well, the future looks great, I think. You know, we've got some very rough spots, obviously,
Yep.
as Chief Hollenbeck alluded to. I think that we're very unique in America. We are really the only country I can think of that we can only police our citizens to the level that they allow themselves to be policed. And that is actually, that's what we're seeing. And so I think the part of the growth that has to happen is as police officers, you know, we have to be cognizant of our community. We have to look at things like court precedents
Yep.
and also even public opinion. And so one of the questions nationally I think that we're asking ourselves is, how do we police right now? What level of force, for instance, do we use for a certain circumstance? And I think that's going to be answered, it's not going to be answered tomorrow, but it is going to be answered based upon current events, upon court precedents, upon state and federal law, and upon our public. And I think moving forward, that is the direction that I think we're going to have to meet in the middle somewhere with what the public expects, and then we have to know, and then we have to do that properly.
Excellent. Absolutely right. Kevin, what do you see from the future from your?
I'm optimistic about it getting
love it.
a lot better.
I love it.
There's some transactions that need to take place on both sides.
Yep.
I think in light of the incidents that's happened recently, and especially by being a black officer,
Yes.
there's some understanding that needs to happen on both sides. Again, I will say this again: everybody that wears a uniform don't need to be in a uniform, but everybody that's in that uniform, 99% of them are trying to, they've taken an oath to do that job and they swear by it. It's going to take some learning from both sides and getting out in the community and teaching the community
Absolutely.
that of how to respond to officers and how officers should respond. And again, it's not going to be easy. I'm optimistic about it working. I'm optimistic about the reform that's coming. It's going to be some challenges there for us, but I know everybody on this panel, every one of them I've worked with for a long time. I think Tiffany, I've known her since she's worked at the PD.
Yes, sir.
These guys are going to be the first to step up with me
Yep.
and with others to say, hey, let's get it done. But we have to make sure that the officers we hire are just as capable and just as have that mindset of being able to work toward that goal. And I think that's something we can do. We're fortunate in our area. You know, we don't have
Agreed.
that issue, but
Agreed.
we're gonna grow with whatever comes out nationally to make our area better, and we can sustain what we're doing.
Excellent. Chief, you've heard four say they're excited and optimistic. How about you? No pressure to be the downer here.
Well, I'm the clincher, the closer, huh?
Excellent. Yes, bring it on home.
I believe we live in the greatest nation on the face of the earth. I think we have been blessed in so many ways, and I also think law enforcement is one of the most noble professions that a man or a woman can take on. That said, I think we're at a critical point in our country, and by critical, I mean we have decisions to make. But the good news is, and I've learned this the hard way over the years, that the only way true growth takes place is in times of discomfort. If we're comfortable and things are going along just fine, we're not growing. And so we have an opportunity. And I know that the men and women sitting at this town hall, including yourself, and so many other leaders in law enforcement and other professions are committed to making sure that we come through this process, this growing process, a much stronger nation, a much more peaceful nation, and a place that everyone can live together in peace and harmony and look at one another as fellow human beings and not being labeled in ways that have created problems.
Exactly. Thank you. I lied. We do have a question or two that came in, and I'll touch on one of them, and then but I want to ask, one of our viewers has asked, what are some activities that each department does currently to build the community relationship? And I'll touch on one that we do. The most popular one that we do is our Cocoa with the Popo, and it is an opportunity. We invite all law enforcement to come out. We provide hot chocolate and cookies and donuts and what have you, and everybody gets to come up and meet us. I want our department to know the people we're serving and to take questions and answer questions, and so that's one that we do. I know, Chief, if you want to talk about maybe one of the efforts that you've done.
The most recent that we're really excited about is the food patrol.
Yes.
Domestic violence has been very prolific during the pandemic, and we've learned that food insecurity is one of those issues that can exacerbate, especially now during a pandemic where people are locked indoors and that sort of thing. So we've partnered with several faith-based organizations and food banks in the River Valley who provide our officers with boxed lunches and sack lunches, and we go out and visit some of the more impoverished areas of town, some of the lower income apartment complexes, and just hand out food and build relationships.
I love it. When I read that, I thought putting two things together, that was a great response and a feeling a need. Sheriff, I know you got yourself out in the county. You're out doing coffee with the coffee chats, and you got your officers out there also doing a lot of listening posts and talking to people.
And I think in some ways, working for a sheriff's department is easier to talk to people.
Yep.
Because you're not necessarily at times going from call to call like Chief
Yes.
Baker's
Yep.
officers are. And, one of the things we encourage is people go to the convenience store. I don't care if you need gas, if you want something to drink, go in and say hi.
Yep.
Because that's where people are. If you're out driving on a county road and you see somebody out working, you can just stop and talk to them. A lot of the community policing efforts, I won't say they've been curtailed, but they've really been inhibited somewhat with the pandemic
Yes, they
for
have.
us.
Yes, they have.
And so we've had to change things that we would normally do, for instance, with the local schools, we
Yep.
haven't been able to. So some of the things that we have noticed recently is a large proportion of thefts and burglaries. So we've had several groups calling about having officers come and talk to them.
Excellent.
Basic community watch programs, things like
Absolutely.
that. So kind of getting back to basics.
Yep.
And we're just starting to see, I guess, things change where we can get out in the public again. And
Yes.
in fact, I was talking with our community resource officer today, and he was saying, I like patrol. I did it for a long time, but I'm really ready to get back
Yeah.
to the community. So,
I love
it's coming. It's
Good.
slow, but we do have opportunities every day. That's one of the things I think, like Danny said, community policing isn't about one specific person. It should be every day, something that you have opportunities. Don't
Every
miss them. Recognize them, take advantage of them, and you're putting credit in that community bank.
That's right, absolutely. And Bill, good Lord, I've watched your department at every event, in every school event, whether it be a basketball game, football game, kids coming up, high-fiving, you're involved in stuff. So obviously you're telling your officers they got to be involved too. So I want to touch on anything else that
Just the fact that we're just lucky enough to be inside the schools.
Yep.
We're doing this every single day. Our focus group, of course, are our students, our future.
Yep.
So, we have officers that are actually stationed in secondary schools, but, one of the things that we do outreaches to our elementary schools.
Yes.
Getting out there and doing programs with them and
Yep.
making PTA meetings. But something as simple as getting out there during recess and playing kickball
Yep,
with the kids
exactly.
and things
Yes.
of that nature, and trying to establish that positive relationship at that young age, and hoping that relationship will carry on as they enter junior high and high school, and then later on in adulthood, and then other local law enforcement agencies hopefully get to reap the benefit of the investment that, our officers inside the schools are doing.
Absolutely. Well, I ran a little long, and I apologize, but I wanted to get that question answered. There's a couple more that came in, but we are short on our time, and I want to respect everybody's time. Like I said, I know everybody here is going to something else after this, so I appreciate your time. On that note, you heard something mentioned a couple of times about when an officer sees something, and everyone touched on it. And one of the topics that's coming up in our world is the duty to intervene. Certainly after what happened in Minneapolis, we've all been reaching out and talking about when that officer sees something, to say something and be empowered to do that. So more panels might be coming, Bill, to answer your wish on that, and we'll be talking about the duty to intervene, and certainly we'll be talking, I know, together. As soon as Danny gets that policy written, we'll dance off of his policy.
It's in there.
It's I've already got it emailed to me too, so I've seen it. So, but thank you everyone for coming. I thank everybody in the audience. I know you had a great response rate on the internet while I'm looking at, and thank everybody for coming tonight. And with that, we will see everybody later.
Hello.
Hello. Yee yee.
All right. Thank you very much for coming to our live stream. Actually, there's music playing over here, isn't there? Hold on. Oh, no, I muted it. There you go. Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for coming out to our event. We spent a lot of time on this, and we were very excited to be doing this in Jameson.
Yeah, I just, again, thank you to everyone who was able to come out and support. Like I said, we've been planning, plotting, interviewing, getting in touch with for all of about, I'd say, 2.5 months.
Yep.
We put a lot of hard work into it, and I think it's going to turn out great. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Yeah,
We're going to, for everyone in chat, we're going to have access to a survey, and we'd be very grateful if you filled it out to tell us how we did. This is part of a project for the Chancellor's Leadership Council, and all the things that we're doing here is being graded. So that'll just help us tell you how much or help you tell us how much we engaged the community. And once again, we're very thankful that you're here.
Yep. Right. And if you're watching this on YouTube, after the fact, the survey will be in the description. So you can just go down there, click that link, and fill that out for us. We'll be greatly appreciated.
Have a good evening, everyone.